Another year come and gone, we had plenty of horror movies to keep our strange interests satisfied. 2023 might not have been quite as strong as 2022 in terms of new releases in the genre, but there were still a number of great new additions, so let's rank them. Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. So here we are, last video of the year, and what a year it's been. From killer robot toys and desecrated children's stories to horrifying nightmares and breakout pieces, 2023 had a lot to offer horror fans. It was also the year that I finally got my shit together with this channel and it started finding its footing, so thank you for helping to push me to continue to improve over these last 12 months. Two things that I want to mention before we get to the ranking. One, I didn't see every horror movie that came out this year, and I can't rank it if I haven't seen it, so if there's something missing that you enjoyed or you wanted to hear my thoughts on, I apologize in advance if it was a blind spot for me. The other thing is that this ranking isn't necessarily based on the objective quality of these movies. When I do rankings, I prefer to focus on how much I enjoyed something and how likely I am to rewatch it, because if rankings were based purely on the measurable stuff, they'd all be the same, and that's boring. I welcome everyone to share their rankings in the comments, but please just don't be a dick. We're all here for the love of horror, and discouraging differences in opinion does zero favors to anyone and just makes you look narrow-minded, so let's keep it nice and civil. Alright, let's do this.
I think these drawings could be clues from my past.
There's so much you don't know.
What a disappointment this was. Insidious is a movie that I hold very near and dear. I'm 22, so that first movie came out around the time that I was starting to get into horror, and I can vividly remember how much it scared me. I was championing The Red Door going in because I love Insidious, but also because it was Patrick Wilson's directorial debut, and I love that dude. I really wanted to see him come out of the gate swinging, and in some ways, his time spent around James Wan shines through in his abilities as a director. The camera work was fantastic, and there were some great examples of tension building, but the magic of the world that The magic of the world that James Wan created back in 2010 is pretty much lost here. The Further has absolutely all of its intrigue and uniqueness sucked out of it, doing away with all of the melding of time periods and uncertainty of what lay around every corner that made it feel so fascinating. The story felt underdeveloped, and by the end of the movie, the world of this franchise isn't progressed by the slightest. I don't think it's a terrible, worthless movie, but I left it feeling super deflated. I am looking forward to whatever Wilson directs in the future because he does show a lot of promise. He just needs a much better script to work with.
What do they want?
They want to make her like them.
Happy?
I found it really interesting to see how varied the opinions on this movie are. Some people absolutely loved it, and I will say that seeing it in the theater with fans cheering at certain moments was a really great experience that gave me a lot of joy. I'm glad that the movie performed as well as it did, because that's just good for horror, and I'm glad that the fans got what they wanted. But for me, personally, I found this to be the most boring theater watch I've had all year. The story was cookie cutter with shallow characters that don't go through much of an arc. The lore is danced around because this movie needed to be PG-13. The setting and animatronics were super underutilized, which really sucks because of how insanely well designed they all were, and the biggest thing, it wasn't fun. I just felt like it was taking itself way too seriously, and it managed to take a really great concept and adapt it in the absolute safest possible way, and clearly that worked for a lot of people. I walked into this movie knowing that I wasn't the target audience, but I was just shocked at how little they utilized the best parts. Sequels are definitely on the way, and while I hope they'll improve on the severe structural issues, I'm also well aware that this just isn't made for me. They were not making this movie for me, and they clearly did right by the fans, so stay course, I guess, but I might just walk the captain's plank on this one.
What happened? I think there's something here.
God, was I ever relieved that this was an improvement over the first movie, because if I had to sit through something that bad again, it would be a lot lower on the list. The Nun 2 was a step up from The Nun, but that's such a low bar that I'm not sure it really counts for much. I'll admit, I've eased up on it a bit since I reviewed it initially more than I have for some other releases this year. I still don't think it's all that good, but as a low brain power horror movie, I think you can have fun with it. The set pieces could be pretty entertaining, and there was more going on plot-wise this time around, but it really does feel like the fucking awesome demon setup in The Conjuring is being wasted on these stupid scripts that have zero idea how to build up a villain. The same scares were used over and over again, and the climax was the same sort of insane, over-the-top ridiculousness meant to please your average moviegoer that we got in the first one. The characters, thankfully, had a nice bump in quality this time around, shot a hell of a lot better, and I just think it was more fun overall. It's not great, but I'm not as sour on it as I was when it came out, and I can see myself rewatching it on days off work where I decide to leave half my brain in bed for the day.
What is this supposed to be? It's the thing that comes for your kids when you're not paying attention.
Despite its glaring flaws, I really enjoyed this movie when it came out, and I still do to a degree, but over time I'm finding its issues a lot harder to overlook. It's got some major pacing issues and the narrative side is really weak, but I'll still stand by that it's really well directed and has some of the more compelling visuals this year. The opening shot is one of the more memorable moments I had in a theater in 2023, and while it set the stage for a movie that was a hell of a lot better than the final product, I still find myself enjoying it on occasion. There's a lot of fantastic camera work and particularly great use of lighting, the moon lamp rolling down the hall. The sound design is also fantastic, and it's the combination of all of these elements that make for these great self-contained scare sequences that really stood out to me. It's not particularly original or frightening, but it's just a cool sensory experience for the most part.
Wherever those girls went, they brought something back with them. The body and the blood of Jesus Christ.
Here we go again. A few months ago, I really learned just how strongly people feel about this movie, but sorry, I still don't think it deserves as much hate as it got. People misconstrued my review as me saying this is a great movie, which I didn't say then, and I'm not saying now. It's got a lot of issues, and it's really just a generic possession movie, but there are things about it that I enjoyed. It would have worked a hell of a lot better without the Exorcist name being tied to it, because trying to follow that movie up with this is ridiculous. So from that angle, I get it, but I just don't hate the movie. And I think that comes down to the fact that I don't hate generic possession movies. This kind of thing is perfect for hazy Saturday afternoons where my brain is turned off. And for me, that's exactly the spot that the Exorcist Believer lands in. There's enough that I like in the first half of the movie to keep me interested, and even when it becomes clear that the characters are thinner than wax paper and the mushy bowl of unfinished ideas defines the narrative by the end, I don't find it boring. It's got a decent first act, and that remains entertaining for me, but it's still got a ton of issues like how Chris is handled and how little development the main characters get. The Halloween trilogy from David Gordon Green, despite how you may feel about it, does feel like it was made by a Halloween fan. But Believer doesn't have that same feeling of passion behind it. It's a bunch of ideas messily thrown at the wall to see if they stick without giving any one of them enough attention to work, and even though I don't mind watching the movie, this thing can feel maddening at times as someone who considers the original Exorcist as a strong contender for the greatest horror movie ever made. I got a bunch of shit last time, not for saying that I thought it was a good movie, which I've never said and I will never say, but because I said I don't hate it. That's such a weird thing. Let's see if it happens again.
Did you see the size of that bloody thing?
I think if I'd seen this in the theater, I might have had a better time with it, and I also do think that it was a victim of what I wanted it to be. I love a good atmospheric vampire movie, and I absolutely adore nautical horror, so combining those two things together should be an easy win, but the reason this didn't work quite so well is because it just felt really shallow. Visually, it's got its moments, and some of the action sequences were really fun, but I found myself wanting them to lean more into the atmosphere and character dynamics than they did. These feel very much like movie characters, and I think the whole movie just leaned into being more of a blockbuster style than the more subdued atmospheric experience I would have wanted out of this setting. I don't think it helped that this came out while Nosferatu was heavy on my mind, because all I could think about the whole time was how Robert Eggers would have handled this story, but that's not a slight against the movie, it's just me preferring something that this wasn't trying to be. I didn't hate it, but I found it pretty forgettable and somewhat frustrating because of all the potential this chapter of Dracula had. Fun movie, but not particularly memorable, and definitely got hurt by me projecting what I wanted it to be.
There's a darkness inside of me. It followed me here.
I will start off by saying that Scream isn't my go-to horror franchise. I like it. I respect how groundbreaking that first movie was when it came out, but this style of meta horror isn't really my thing, and beyond the original movie, I was never really blown away by them. I do enjoy the series though, and 6 was a damn good time that I thought improved on almost everything about that last movie. The action sequences were really great, particularly that part on the ladder, and I was very relieved that the meta elements were less annoying than in 5. The sort of countdown that's taking place with the masks was a really great idea that had me super excited for the reveal because it felt like they were building up to something truly impactful that would bring the series full circle. And then it falls flat on its face in the third act. I have issues with a lot of the reveals in this franchise, so I wasn't exactly surprised, but it was really disappointing just how much Scream 6 fell apart at the end after all that buildup. This was like the safest sequel they could have made. The stakes are extremely low, and it's really distracting to have characters' survival likelihood after being stabbed be entirely based on how important they are to the story. It's wildly inconsistent, and that makes it super hard to feel any real tension when a main character is in danger because you know they'll survive. It's been a while since I've seen the other entries, so it might be time to go back through them all again, but Scream 6 is a really mixed bag for me. Fantastic opening scene, really fun slasher action, and build up to a reveal that all, unfortunately, falls apart in spectacular fashion in the third act, leaving the story and characters in basically the same positions they were at the end of 5. And, I mean, I haven't talked about the whole Scream 7 situation, but, it's a shame that this is where we're leaving that story.
No more nightmares tonight. Okay, champ?
So I planned on reviewing this movie in October, but I got all out of sorts trying to finish up that ridiculous Halloween Ends video and wound up rescheduling a bunch of stuff, but I enjoyed Cobweb quite a bit, and I do want to talk about it more in depth at some point. Reception was pretty mixed on this one. I can definitely see why, but what I walked away from it feeling is that it's like they directly took the experience of a local ghost story in your neighborhood as a kid and translated the feeling of being told that story. It's not an overly dark, serious horror movie, but it feels like you're being told a dark fairy tale that's become a small town legend that kids tell about the spooky house down the road, and I had a blast with it. It's shot absolutely beautifully and has a great look and feel for a watch during the month of October, and the way the ridiculous story unfolded was just really fun. It's got some pretty rough narrative flaws, but overall I enjoyed it and found it to be a unique and atmospheric fairy tale that I'm glad I finally got around to seeing. It'll get its day in Rocklin Graves eventually, but I do recommend giving it a look, and hopefully you'll have a good time with it. It does have one of the creepiest scenes in a movie this year, so kudos to them for that.
It's time to play a game. You all pretended to cure me.
I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch this franchise because it's been years since I've seen the others, but if I'm going off of memory, I'd say Saw X is a really strong contender for the best movie in the series. I was always wanting a Saw movie that fully focused on John Kramer's character because there's so much potential there, and Saw X pretty much nailed it. I was genuinely surprised by just how well made this movie is. It's cool to see them worry more about storytelling in this one instead of just trying to get to the traps as fast as humanly possible, and it's especially cool when the story they're telling is actually really interesting and does a great job at getting you invested in Kramer's mission. The people in the traps here are absolute scumbags and you want to see them go through hell, and the movie doesn't disappoint with the traps. These bastards are put through some truly gnarly shit, with one trap in particular actually making my stomach turn a bit. It's nasty, but this movie does still continue the slightly irritating trend of them having nowhere near enough time to complete these tasks before they're killed. I haven't given it a second watch yet, but I'd like to go through the entire franchise again, and I'm pretty sure Saw X will still be right up there.
If someone wants to be heard, we are here.
So I had no idea that this was part of a trilogy. I walked into this movie thinking it was a standalone film and walked out of it thinking it was a standalone film. I didn't know about the others until I was researching for my review on the movie, and I'm gonna have to check them out because I had a really good time with this one. It's not a scary movie by any means, but I really enjoyed the murder mystery set in this isolated building on the water during a heavy storm. It's a beautifully atmospheric movie that basically feels like spooky Knives Out, which I'm all on board for since Knives Out is one of my all-time favorite movies. And it's a little hard to talk about the things that really sold me on A Haunting in Venice without spoiling certain plot elements, so suffice it to say, it's got some really fun tricks up its sleeve. I will pick up a copy of it to have around for the month of October because it fits right in for a watch during that time of year. And if you didn't get a chance to check it out, I definitely recommend giving it a watch.
Esto va a ser un infierno.
This is one of those movies that you can't recommend to everyone because you might just cause them permanent brain damage if they aren't properly acclimated to this kind of thing. There's some shit here that you simply won't forget seeing, but it's not just a shock horror movie made with no other vision outside of disturbing the viewer. It's a genuinely well-made movie with a lot of chilling moments that don't rely on shock horror. The performances are all fantastic and really make you care about these people, and the only spot where it runs into issues is with the consistently horrible decision-making. I've had a number of conversations about the decision-making in this movie since putting out my review, but I fully stand by how heavily I criticized that in that video because I found it genuinely frustrating and it took a lot away from the movie for me. I could probably make a dedicated video talking about this, not that I think it would be very interesting, but none of the explanations people have given me have made this part of the movie feel less annoying. Should go to say then that even though I have these major issues with the movie, that it's still pretty high up on my list and I still highly recommend it. It's a great movie marred by one big issue, and the good stuff outweighs the bad. Give it a watch, but I'm warning you now, it's got some moments that might burn themselves into your mind.
Model 3 generative android, Megan for short.
I can't believe you made this. I love it.
Okay, shut the fuck up, let me explain, give me a fucking second. This ranking isn't necessarily based off of objective filmmaking quality. There are movies below this one that are objectively better movies, but Megan's become one of those fun comfort horror movies for me, and that goes a long way in my books. I think I'm more likely to rewatch this than some of the others, and that's why I've got it higher up. It's a guilty pleasure without a doubt, but hey, it is what it is. This is just a fun, reliable movie that I could throw on when I'm in the mood for a brain-off, goofy horror movie, and I found it to be genuinely enjoyable every time, goddammit. The unrated cut definitely makes a difference and is an improvement over the theatrical version, but it's not so wildly different that I'd recommend it to people who didn't enjoy the theatrical cut as a way to win them over. I love this kind of goofy horror movie, but I do get why a lot of people didn't enjoy it as much. When Evil Lurks is a better movie, and a few others are as well, but I can't deny how rewatchable I found Megan to be, and I want my ranking to reflect that. It's goofy as hell, and when I'm in the mood for that kind of thing, this movie hits the nail on the head. I know, I don't feel great about this, but I can't deny my ape brain some candy, so this spot is dedicated to that.
Oh, I've got plenty to be thankful for.
Alright, this one just felt like it played into my nostalgia for things like My Bloody Valentine. There are tons of slasher movies that exist to pay homage to 80s horror, and Thanksgiving is definitely one of the best examples of something that set out to deliver that experience and actually succeeded. Flaws of the genre included. I just had so much fun watching it that I didn't really think much into the third act, but after some reflection, I'm definitely looking back on the ending of the movie with less enthusiasm, but on the whole, this is just a dumb, fun slasher movie that knows exactly what it is and delivered the promised experience of a throwback 80s slasher movie. Weak characters and writing are there, the ending is not great, but it's the movie's killer and its moment-to-moment set pieces that make it work as well as it does. It's not trying to take the slasher genre and do something new with it, but instead fully leaning into the classic elements of the genre for fans to have fun with, and hey, I had a great time. It'll be in the rotation next Thanksgiving without a doubt, and the sequel we all knew was coming has been confirmed, so I'll be looking forward to that whenever it comes around.
I'm getting us out of here, I promise.
When I first reviewed this movie, I was hyping the ever-loving shit out of it, and I even put it as my #1 spot for the Evil Dead franchise ranking, which caused absolutely no disagreement whatsoever with anyone. Without getting into details, there was some shit going on in my life that made getting out to a theater and seeing a really fun horror movie a wonderful break, which is part of what caused me to be so in love with it. I still think Rise is a fantastic movie and keeps the saying there are no bad Evil Dead movies alive and well, but I don't think it would rank at the top spot for me now if I were to re-rank the franchise. I think a fair bit would move around, but that aside, Evil Dead Rise is still an absolute blast of a movie that felt like it took everything about the other entries that works and mushed them all into a tight runtime full of really creepy moments and translated the formula to an urban landscape really well. Its visual tone, sound design, and especially the main Deadeye performance from Alyssa Sutherland are just fantastic. And while I really wish we could have gotten more of that monstrosity at the end, it's such an insanely fun, bloody climax that was one of the most memorable sequences I had in a theater this year. I've definitely cooled off on it a bit, and I do plan on getting into its issues more when I do a deep dive on the movie next year, But I can't deny how much fun I have with Evil Dead Rise, and I'll also always cherish it for giving me some respite from some really tough shit that was going on at the time. It's like an Evil Dead haunted house thrill ride. I love it for that.
I could see and feel everything on the other side.
What a shocker this was. When I first saw the trailer for this before, I think it was Beau is Afraid, I thought it looked like shit. So I walked into the theater expecting the most bland, cookie-cutter movie imaginable and walked out very pleasantly surprised. There's a really unique tone and presentation to Talk to Me that made it stand out a lot, and the steadily increasing insanity and lack of trust in reality makes for a really unsettling watch. The way the story touches on themes of addiction, loneliness, and grief were so incredibly well done, and the performances all around were stellar. Casting as well, my god, this was so well cast. Particularly Sophie Wilde, who really lives up to her name, because the fact that this was her first credit on IMDb is just ridiculous. The characters were people that you can actually relate with and care about because they all felt believable, and I think the fact that this was made by some younger dudes who actually know how young people interact made a huge difference where that's concerned. It was so refreshing to have a movie so consistently subvert my expectations and toyed with me in a way that hasn't happened in a while. It's also disturbing as all hell. This thing pulls zero punches and will definitely leave its mark on you, and I do think it's absolutely in the running for the objective best horror movie of the year. It's fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to this sequel that we all knew was coming within 3 days of this thing being out. I think it's the highest grossing A24 movie now. Talk to Me is fucking fantastic. The brothers took some major risks by turning down a big studio offer that would have messed up the creative vision, and it's great to see a movie made by passionate people who took it into their own hands to maintain their vision and keep it a local production and have it blow up in the insane way that Talk to Me has. Bravo. Deep Dive is going to be coming sometime next year. I need to talk about this movie more.
In this house.
Atmosphere. These top two were hard to choose between, but for the sake of the ranking, I put this at the #1 spot because it's the one that had the biggest impact on me, and I think it's the movie that excited me the most when it came out because of how unique it is and what it implied for the current space of indie filmmaking. Plus, the atmosphere is something that just really clicked with me. It's an absolutely bizarre and unorthodox experience that brought on genuine anxiety and unease pretty much the whole way through, and its ending left me feeling a sense of dread that I only thought Lake Mungo could ever do. Not that it got to me as much as Lake Mungo does, that's still unmatched, and I'm freaking out trying to find a way to make a video about that does the movie justice. Skinamarink freaked me out though. And the fact that a movie made primarily by one dude and a few actors for $15,000 made $2.1 million after the magnum dong that 2022 was for the genre is just really exciting to me. I'm well aware that a lot of people found this to be super boring, and I totally get that. It's not one I've had any arguments about with anyone, because anytime someone said they didn't like it or found it boring, I've always replied by saying that's absolutely fair and I get it. But it worked for me extremely well and delivered an experience I think I've been wishing for my whole life, but never really thought it would be possible to do effectively. Yet, here we are. It's absolutely chilling and makes you feel like a vulnerable child in the most immersive way I've ever experienced in a movie. It's literally like living through a nightmare, but that absolute commitment to the strange and confusing feeling is gonna turn some people off. I'm fascinated by it, and I can't wait to see what Kyle Edward Ball has in store in the future. It's also nice to see a Canadian filmmaker manage to have their project do this well, so that's part of it too. So there we have it. I have got some catching up to do with a few other movies that came out this year that I never got around to, but I was pretty happy with the selection of stuff we got from 2023. We never reached the heights of last year, which was just a ridiculously stacked year for horror, but we got some really solid and memorable horror movies that just continued to prove that the genre is flying high right now with a ton of creativity and fresh ideas from some really exciting filmmakers. 2024 has got some pretty big things to look forward to, and I'll be giving my list of my most anticipated movies of the year very soon. I've basically got the whole year scheduled for video releases, and it's pretty damn packed, so I'm excited to dive into a ton of really fun stuff. But until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.